Okay, thank you very much for joining. Let's start because we can hear him now. So better to ask him to request him to start the lecture. So on behalf of the department, I welcome all of you. And you are aware that Professor Swadhin Sen from Bangladesh, we will deliver today the 5th lecture in this Chattopadhyaya Memorial Series. Now I request my colleague Dr. Suchira to formally introduce Professor Sen. Yeah, and she will conduct the proceedings of this lecture. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is our 5th memorial lecture in honor of Professor B.D. Chattopadhyaya. And we have with us today, online of course, our very dear friend, Professor Swadhin Sen. He is currently a professor in the Department of Archaeology, Jahangirnagar University. He has done his PhD from the Department of Archaeology, Jahangirnagar University in 2014 under a co-directed program between University of Lyon, France, and of course Jahangirnagar University. Currently, he is conducting studies under a project on paleoecology of Bengal and on structures and process of heritage production, as well as on full coverage surveying, geoarchaeology, and excavations in northwestern part of Bangladesh. He is also working on the total survey and excavation for understanding the human landscape water interactions in the alluvial terrain of Bangladesh using methods and techniques of field archaeology, geoarchaeology, and social anthropology. He has large number of national and international publications to his credit. Moreover, he is not only a very good friend of us, we know that he is a passionate field worker and is a wonderful teacher. He has also interacted with our students much earlier also once come down to Shantiniketan. His current book is one of the very important books that has come up. It's an edited volume on the archaeology of and medieval South Asia. From the Eastern Ganga Brahmaputra Basin with Supriya Burman and P.P. Sahu. It's a kind of a joint edited book. Other than that, he has a lot of other books as well as journals written written by himself. So as I think there is a communication problem where probably Professor Swadhin Sen is not being able to hear us. So what we do is we ask Professor Swadhin Sen to start away with his lecture. So maybe
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you absolutely.
Okay.
So Swadhin, so please, please start your lecture. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Suchira, a very good friend of mine. And also, I would like to express my debt of gratitude to Professor Anil Kumar and all the students and the organizers of the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology of Visvaharati University. I have very long friendship with the people and faculties of Visvaharati University. First, I was there to deliver a lecture on the invitation of Professor Arun Nag. I was invited also to stay in Shantiniketan, and I also visited Shantiniketan for several times after that. So it's a great honor and privilege to deliver this lecture and to be invited by the Department of Archaeology and the students and teachers. And it's also great honor and sadness for me also that I was supposed to deliver this lecture organized in memory of Professor Brojudural Chattopadhyaya. And I was the first one. I was supposed to be the first one. I was then in Delhi and I became suddenly very sick and I couldn't deliver that one. And I am sad because Professor B.D. Chattopadhyaya, popularly known as BDC, and I fondly call him Brojudural sir, was very dear to me. And in fact, we have dedicated our recent edited volume in fond memory of his work and his friendship with us. So I am really privileged, honored, and humbled to deliver this lecture in memory of the loving presence of Professor Prajudol Chattopadhyay in our mind, in our heart, and also in our head, of course. So, in fact, I was supposed to deliver this lecture. I thought about the topic several times, and lastly, I decided to talk about uh, urbanism, especially in relation to Mahasthan in Bengal, because it has a background. We are working in northwestern part of Bangladesh for more than 20 years. We started our field work, especially archaeological surveying and geoarchaeological research. Uh, it is also, I should recall and fondly remember Professor Rajaguru sir, who has recently left us. And he basically initiated these geoarchaeological and landscape archaeological research in Bangladesh. We fondly call him the father of the geoarchaeology or alluvial geoarchaeology in Bangladesh. So it is a long experience of our field work in Dinajpur, in Greater Dinajpur district, comprising largely of the Dinajpur, Panchgod, Thakurgaon, this region, and also the Greater Rangpur district. And personally, I started my excavation training, in fact, uh, with the French archaeological mission in Bangladesh, who are excavating in Mahasthan in 1998. And then I participated with the excavation in Mahasthan. And I also visited Mahasthan for the first time when I was a first year student as a field work. So we and I have a very long and intimate relationship with the Mahasthan and Mahasthan God. It is also covers almost 20 years. And we have visited with different kinds of experience, different kinds of say, mindset, and gradually with our experience of the archaeological sites and archaeology of that region, we are going to Mahasthan again and again with new questions, new problems, and new focuses. And recently, I have also worked in a project for updating the tentative list of Bangladesh. It was under the supervision of Government Department of Archaeology, Ministry of Cultural Affairs. We have also developed a proposal on cultural landscape of Mahasthan. For that work also, I closely worked with our friends and colleagues of Department of Archaeology, and one of our former students, and he's currently doing his master's in under Erasmus Mundus program, and he's presently here. He also did a little bit of survey under my suggestion in the neighborhood region of Mahasthan to update the presence of archaeological sites and all the things. In fact, in the traditions of archaeology on Mahasthan, Mahasthan Gaur, or what is known as the Pundon Ragara, the urban center, has received the focus. And 2 or 3 sites outside the fortified area, like Vasubihara, like Bihar Mount, like Gokul Mer, like Gobindo Vita, these have attracted some attention. Otherwise, hundreds of sites or settlements around Mahasthangarh over a large area have remained outside consistent focus of the archaeologists, of the historians, and many other scholars. In fact, Monica L. Smith has written one paper on Mahasthan and his hinterland, and it was published in the first interim report. And there he first focused on the hinterland zone from a different perspective. So I am talking about this hinterland because today I am going to focus on some aspects of urbanism, largely in reference to South Asian traditions of scholarship, in reference to Mahasthan. And I will also focus on some of the other urban centers or known urban centers in reference to textual sources from medieval period also. For example, the Gaur in West Bengal, Malda, or Pandava in West Bengal, Malda, and Khalifatabad in the southern part of Bangladesh in Bagherhat district. Or also I will refer to Chandraketu in West Bengal, the southern part of West Bengal, or Tamluk, the southern part of West Bengal. So these are mostly the well-known cities or identifies as cities or town or urban centers in Bengal. There are many textual reference to other urban centers. For example, in the southeastern part, we have epigraphic evidence of, for example, Devopadata, the capital city of the Deva dynasty of the Kumilla, Lalmai, Moinamoti region. But we haven't yet identified any tangible archaeological evidence to identify any site or settlement as an urban center or a city. This is another issue that I would like to focus. If you kindly allow me, I would like to share my PPT presentation. And as this lecture is intended mostly for the students, I will also be honored to use the whiteboard, if it is available in Zoom, to interpret some of the terms and concepts of archaeology, as I will be focusing mostly on the archaeology of urbanism. So now I am sharing my PPT presentation with you all. So I think it is visible for you. No? Shuchira, could you please confirm?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So the title of my presentation today, Archaeology of Urban / or Rural and the Problems of Homogenization. Engagement with the urbanism of early Bengal in reference to Mahasthan and Bangladesh. Though I have referred to early Bengal, but I will also sometimes refer to compare or to relate my argument and my propositions with some of the urban centers of the later period, that is the period which is known as medieval. So, in fact, for some disclaimer, I would like to, I will try to avoid a normative and prescriptive voice, and I will try to propose my arguments or interpretation as some probabilistic one on the basis of mostly archaeological and geoarchaeological data. Of course, I will corroborate with epigraphical and textual data. And with that, I will also point at the discrepancies between epigraphic and textual data with the archaeological data which we get on the field or which are detected by our archaeological research. Given that both textual and epigraphic studies and archaeological studies have their own methodological and conceptual limitations. And secondly, we would like to raise questions and problematize the concept and practices of urbanism, particularly in early Bengal, in reference to greater Indian subcontinent. And I will show that we need to focus more on region-specific and some other variable-specific notion and definition and ideas of urbanism, rather than just depending upon some standards or notions of urbanism which has been developed in reference to, for example, the first urbanism, the Harappan civilization, which has of course been attained greatest focus in Indian archaeology or South Asian archaeology. And secondly, the second urbanism, that is which is identified within the bracket of early historic period. So this Indocentrism, or we should rather mention these Ganges, Jamuna, Doab centrism will be problematized in my presentation. And I will rather point to some problems or questions, because we don't have answer to all the questions. And I would like to acknowledge, usually many people do the acknowledgement at the end of the lecture, but I would like to do it first, because this presentation represents a long teamwork, and as well as our collaborative work with the Department of Archaeology, Ministry of Cultural Affairs, and many other individuals. I would like to acknowledge Froza Khan Mita, Saifur Rahman, Amiruzzaman Polash, and Abir bin Kaisar, and Heritage Cell of the Department of Archaeology, Ministry of Cultural Affairs. And from our team, which is of course changing over the years, because new members are being included, old members are being just transferring to their new jobs and new professions. So Professor Syed Muhammad Kamrul Hassan, Abid bin Kaisar, who was also a member of our team, Professor Dr. Khurshid Alam, Ahmed Sharif, Kabbu Kritika, Ghulam Maula Murad, Taizul Islam Taj, and many others. So I would like to thank and acknowledge all of their contribution in our work in the northern part of Bangladesh, and particularly in our arguments or propositions in this paper. And I would like to begin with the much debated and much discussed and very well received and bestseller book by David Graeber and David Wingrove, The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. In fact, when I was reading this book, it basically it covers so many things within a very short, in fact, it is almost 600-page book, but still so many things have been covered, which raises many questions and many criticisms also. But still, some of the arguments, which are mostly from the archaeological perspectives, had attracted my attention, because I could compare or relate our problems and our thinkings with the problems which have been proposed by David Graeber and David Wingrove. For example, what is the idea of the city? And when we'll put the urbanism in the scheme of dominant evolutionary framework, it is very important to point at the fact that urbanism in dominant narrative or dominant conception is identified as a stage of social evolution and as a stage of human achievement. And in fact, David Graeber and David Wingrove both have taken an anti-evolutionary stance in their book, and they have suggested the valid reason for doing that. And they have questioned the idea of city, the idea that how urbanism developed and how cities became prominent in the stage of Bronze Age, or in the stage which is known as also the civilizational stage of human evolution. And they have pointed at the recent discoveries of many archaeological sites, particularly like Çatalhöyük in Turkey, the Gölbekli Tepe in Turkey. There are many mega sites in Ukraine, which were earlier unknown because they were not translated in English, their publications, and we were not aware of them. And at the same time, they pointed at the changing pattern of the research on urbanism in Mesopotamia region, in Egypt, also in Mesoamerica region, where they pointed out that the earlier notion of urbanism, which was developed post Gordon Childian thesis of urban revolution, has its own issues and problems, and many problems have to be addressed in respect or with regard to the particular regional context, with regard to the particular ecology, with regard to the particular environment, and with regard to the particular pattern of life. So they have proposed that in contrast to the universalized and homogenized evolutionary theory, they proposed that the notion of urbanism as a stage of social evolution or as a marker of a complex society with some hierarchy, with some stratification, with some conflicts, has to be abandoned or has to be questioned. On the basis of this reference, I would like to begin our questions. In fact, the first questions definitely will be, what is urban and urbanism? Most of us who are the students of history, archaeology, and many other disciplines like geography and recent development of the disciplines like urban planning and all the other things, they have different kinds of definitions and understanding of urbanism. But most of the dominant definitions have many aspects in common. For example, I have mentioned that most of the scholars or in the dominant narratives, it is assumed that urbanism is a stage of human evolution and it depicts the achievement of human society and the development from simple society into complex society. And there are different kinds of manifestations of this urbanism and in fact, in terms of demography, in terms of demographic distribution or density, in terms of size of the settlement, in terms of the complexities or functional zones of the settlement, in terms of the relationship with the hinterland zone, in terms of the functional and behavioral pattern of the inhabitants of the cities or urban centers, and in terms of many other aspects which are identified as oppositional to the settlements or to behaviors or to other aspects which are identified as non-urban. And interestingly, Nihar Ranjan Ray in 1978 written a very interesting paper on these assumptions of urban and rural, specifically in Indian understanding of urbanism. And he has mentioned many textual sources, specifically the normative ones like Arthashastra of Chanakya, or the literary one like Kama Shastras or Kama Sutras of Vatsayana, and as well as many Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras. And he has proposed that mostly in the textual sources, even in the Buddhist textual sources, urban centers were not very preferred or not very liked by the writers or by the tailors of those texts. Mostly they concentrated on the rural settlements as a pure, as some kind of dissociated from complexity and some kind of isolated from the mundanity of life. On the other hand, urban centers were depicted or illustrated as the space of luxury, space of different kinds of activities, space of different kinds of activities which are not very pure or which are not very accepted in terms of the social norms. In that sense, a very good book was written by Shonalika Kaul by the Imagining the Urban. where she used different textual sources uh, to point out the how urbanity and urban lives were imagined in the written in various textual sources. But here we would like to point to the archaeological aspects of urbanism and point to the correlation or corroboration of textual sources and also the differences between textual sources and archaeological sources. And Professor Bojidulal Chattopadhyay, in one of his articles on the urbanism of Bengal, has suggested some very key points. For example, he pointed at the notion of the space and spatial organization as a identifier of urban sites or cities in particularly Bengal. Archaeology of urbanism and urban, and if we go beyond the relationship of textual and written sources, is still dominated by the Gordon Childier notion of urban revolution, where he has proposed some empirical aspects of cities. For example, cities should have some fortification, cities should have some monumental architecture, cities should have some archaeological or material remains which will depict the differences in the society. Cities should have cities are larger in size than the rural or non-cities. Cities must have some kind of depiction of the differences or heterogeneity of material culture, which illustrate the social differentiations and so on. But in Bengal, or particularly in Bangladesh, we have some specific and very important problems regarding also these definitions of archaeology of urbanism. For example, if we just point out some key concepts in archaeology, which will be referred or which will be pointed out several times in this paper, or already been pointed out, that is the idea of space and scale. In archaeology, space is very important. In fact, space and time is considered two of the backbones of archaeology. So how space and spatial pattern are considered and addressed and engaged with in archaeology, especially on a landscape where land, water, and water bodies are entangled to each other, like Bengal. And scale, it is a very important question. What will be our understanding of a settlement on a spatial and temporal scale? And this idea of space and scale are related to the vertical and horizontal patterning. That is, in archaeology, we excavate, we survey, and in excavation, we have to consider both vertical and horizontal patterning of archaeological deposits. In the earlier version of Wheelerian excavation method, it was only the vertical aspect that was focused on. And now in the Harrisian, or the method followed by Edward Harris or proposed by the Edward Harris, and which we are following, we consider and address both vertical and horizontal patterning of archaeological distribution. And along with this, one very important aspect that is often ignored by archaeologists and historians alike is the idea of stratigraphy, archaeological stratigraphy. Often we will find excavation reports without any reference to archaeological stratigraphy. For example, if we will look into the excavations of most of the urban centers of Ganges, Jamuna Dua, for example, Kaushambi, for example, Sravasti, for example, Hastinapur, for example, Kurukshetra or Ahitchhatra. Even in the excavation report of Bangor or Kaunashuborno, we don't have any specific detailed stratigraphy. What we have, some sort of stratification and some sort of periodization in reference to either dynasties. For example, in the report of Bangor, you will find reference to Pala period, or Gupta period or Sena period, some period like that in the excavation report. Or you will find period in reference to some archaeological cultures. For example, PGW culture, painted greyware culture, or NBPW culture, or some other cultures which is defined in terms of some material. So these terms and processes of stratigraphic interpretation and periodization is very constraining for understanding any kind of settlement, whether it is rural or urban or something between it. And in case of the urban center, that I must mention, most of the literature or archaeological literature are based on very small scale. That is the question of scale, very small scale excavation of the entire site. Except, for example, like the work of George Eddosi or some other recent work, all the other excavations are confined to a very small space in a very large urban settlement. At the same time, the sites around the neighborhood, which is identified by many archaeologists and all historians as hinterland zone, which is considered to be the periphery of the urban center and which considered as the supplier of the surplus production for the sustenance of the urban center. These areas or spaces are not really getting very detailed focus or intensive focus in these researches. So this particular aspect must be remembered, that most of the understanding of the urbanism, early historic or first urbanism, even the urbanism which has been proposed by Professor Bojidullah Chattopadhyaya, the third urbanism, and also the urbanism in the medieval period, are dependent mostly on very little or very small scale excavation of the entire site. This scale and the relationship between this space and scale must be considered archaeologically to understand the problems with identifying a settlement as urban or as rural. And most importantly, in any case, historians and archaeologists are not aware or not at all considerate about the formation processes, because especially if we just give example, in any urban center like Mahasthan, where we are getting settlements or occupations one period after another period, one period after another period for more than 2000 years. There people are using and reusing construction materials and soils and deposit continuously for 2000 years. And in many cases, the dating of the archaeological material, even the dating of the stratigraphic context, depended upon these formation processes. And in most cases, the excavation reports are devoid of any kind of reference to the formation processes and to the understanding of the dating based on the specific recent aspects of dating and stratigraphy. For example, we rarely get reference to terminus postquem or terminus antiquem, two of the fundamental laws of stratigraphic dating. If you see any excavation report, you will see just one or two sections with some identifications of layers, and those layers are usually dated on the basis of the archaeological material or artifact which are found within those layers. This is completely wrong according to the dating of stratigraphy or stratigraphic dating, because if we can confirm that this a particular pottery or a particular coin or a particular datable material or fragment of sculpture has been found from a particular layer, that layer firstly may not be contemporary to that artifact at all. It can be reused. Secondly, if that is not reused, then that particular layer would be either contemporary to or later than that artifact. And in case of terminus antiquum, the principle goes in the same direction, but just it says that the feature would be early, contemporary or earlier than the artifact. In most cases, when we consult any earlier excavation report or stratigraphy, we find these particular problems. One, firstly, if I could summarize, firstly, the identification of stratification and conflation of stratification with stratigraphy. Secondly, the interpretation of chronology or dating is based on some spurious or erroneous identification of material culture without any concern to the context and the site formation process, and without any concern to the principles of stratigraphic dating. Thirdly, the scale of the excavation is rarely been questioned, and the notion of periodization based upon either dynastic chronology or some aspect of archaeological culture like NBPW culture, like PGW culture, like black and red ware culture, these are all problematic and spurious. And if we can find some alternative way of understanding in archaeological excavation, then it would be easier to address the problem of space and spatial organization to identify what is rural and what is urban in terms of archaeology. In that sense, most of the standards which are Childian, that is according to Gordon Child, or which are followed in the northern and western part of India might not be always relevant to the context of Bengal or to the context of southern part of India or even to the context of northeastern part of India. In that sense, now I would just go through some of the slides. For example, this is some of the images I have taken from Professor Rupinder Singh's very well-read book, that is which is the textbook. These are the 16 Janapadas, you know, and these are some of the urban centers in the northern part of India, and you are all well aware of these sites. And even when there was a peak or there was a very big initiative to identify urban centers from the epics, for example, Kurukshetra or Hastinapur or Indraprastha, then there was a certain kind of methodological issues and conceptual issues to identify these sites as some sites mentioned in the epics or mentioned in the other textual sources. I am not sure, considering the excavation reports, whether the excavation reports depict or illustrate the similar types of features and similar types of material culture which may corroborate with the textual description of the urban life or urban cities. That is a big issue. If we just conflate the textual reference, whether it is religious text or whether it is epic or whether it is some literary text, like when Vatshayana depicts or illustrates the life of the some urban cities, or in some literature or in some drama, the urban lives are portrayed. So it is very difficult to corroborate those lives and those imaginations with the archaeological records which have been found in the limited area excavation. Even in the limited area excavation, it is very difficult for an archaeologist to corroborate the textual descriptions. But unfortunately, we rely upon this textual description more and try to supplement the archaeological material in the framework of the textual description. And these are some of the urban sites or cities in the southern part of Indian subcontinent. And now we come to this, our Bengal basin, and you are all well aware of this geomorphological and geological setting, and most of the early medieval sub-regions of this area. And some of the sites which are well known in Bengal, I could not include many of the sites. Some of the important sites, for example, like Mahasthan, I will take my spotlight or cursor. This is Mahasthan Gar. We have to differentiate between Mahasthan and Mahasthan Gar. Mahasthan is the region or an area, and Mahasthan Gar is the fortified area, which was probably the mention of, for example, the Pundra Nagara in the Mahasthan Brahmi inscription. And we are, many of us are aware of the rereading of this Brahmi inscription by Professor Susmita Basu Mojumdar recently. And the closest archaeological sites, which is also identified as an urban center, is Bangar. And you can see Bangar here. And another urban center which is not part of Bengal right now. It is part of Bhagalpur in Bihar. It is Champanagar, close to Bikramshila Mahavihara. And another urban center which is also very important or discussed in Bangladesh specifically is Bhitorgarh in northernmost part of Bangladesh. And there is another small urban center. We should not use small or large for this time, because I am going to point at this problem with the scale or size later. That is the Kantapur. And there is Karnashubarna, and there is, you can see the urban centers of Gaur and Pandua, and there are medieval urban centers according to the text is Sonargaon capital city. There is early historic urban center, known urban center like Uwari Boteshwar, and this is Chandraketugor. This is Tamrolipti. This is Baro Bajar, another urban center in medieval period, which was identified as Muhammadabad. And this is Bikrampur. And Shadgambuz Masjid is, of course, in the center of the Khalifatabad, of another urban center of the medieval period. And you are all well known, aware of Lalmai Moynamuti and the mention of several urban centers there, including Devo Parbata. And Chattogram is identified as the famous port of Satkawan or Samandar by the early medieval and medieval text or chronicles by the merchants. So there are several settlements which are identified as urban center. We can see that in this part of our Ganges Brahmaputra Meghna Delta. And now, if we come to Mahasthan, for example, you can see the Google image, that is Mahasthan Gar. This is Mahasthan Gar I was talking about. And Mahasthan Gar is a fortified area, and it is enclosed by wall, enclosed by a moat, and this Karatwa River, which is also mentioned in the Karatwa Mahatma of 13th-14th century, is a Sthal Purana text. And this I will show from Google Earth later, that these particular core, which is identified as the core of urban center, is not cannot be identified solely as a core, because of the presence of many other archaeological settlements around this site. And you can also see, just I will take to point to some of the excavated area here French Bangladesh Joint Mission conducted archaeological excavation. The Eastern Rampart area, the excavation report, 2 excavation reports have been published. They are also conducting archaeological excavation in Boiragir Vita, and there are several gates of into the citadel, which is known as citadel or fortified area. And at the same time, there is a water body which is known as Kalidaho Sagar in the, you can see the north one image which was just prepared by Abir bin Kaisa during our work to show some of the variation on the landscape and relationship with the water body. And now I would like to show you the problems with the Mahasthan. And I think you can see the Google Earth here. You can see this is the Mahasthan God. I will draw something to understand. This is Mahasthan God, the fortified area. And interestingly, this area close to the or outside this fortified area or settlement is just full of archaeological material, dense archaeological material. And all these blue lines are basically paleo channels or abandoned channels. And after the first survey and publication by Professor Chandra Sen, Professor Sufi Mustafizur Rahman did his PhD on Mahasthan archaeology from Deccan College, and he had surveyed this region, and he had identified more than 100 sites around Mahasthan. And most of our concentration is on this uplifted terrace region, which is known as Barint Tract. We are not focusing on the floodplain area, which is marked by many features related to the fluvial transformation. There are rivers, there are different kinds of channel remnants, different kinds of oxbow lake, and so on. We are assuming that people did not live here, which could be completely wrong, as I will come to our discussion later. So these are some of the sites which have been identified by the later survey also by Department of Archaeology, but there are more sites. And interestingly, I must point at the notion of site. I think Dr. Shuchira and many of our students are familiar with these problems with the idea of site. And what could be identified as sites? There are many kinds of deposits. For example, there are structural mounds where we can find architectural remains. There are surface deposits of archaeological materials, especially potsherd and brickbats. There are old and early ponds or tanks. There are water bodies, which are, of course, was part of the space which was used by the people or inhabitants of early Mahasthan. So the entire space, if we consider it, can be divided into different kinds of spatial zones. For example, somewhere you will find the density of the structural mounds are greater than the other parts. You will find in some places the water bodies. You will find in some places the concentration of tanks or ponds. In this reference, how we will understand the space, or if I can rephrase, how we'll address an urban space like Mahasthan. And interestingly, Monica Smith, Michael Smith, and many other archaeologists have pointed at the notion of space in terms of differential aspects of their function, including their symbolic and behavioral aspects. In Mahasthan, for example, where we are not getting any kind of archaeological material, what would be identified as empty space? Firstly, if it was not used by the early inhabitants of Mahasthan, then we may not find any kind of archaeological material. Or if they were used, the archaeological material or archaeological remains may not survive because of the formation processes. And most importantly, what is identified as empty? Is it empty? Or was it not a part of the lifeways of the early inhabitants? In fact, if we just draw some analogy with our modern cities or towns, we will find different kinds of spaces. We will find, for example, buildings, marketplaces, we will find residential places, we will find administrative places and so on. We will also find some places which are empty, which are not particularly related to the, for example, the notion of settlement, that is Bastu. If we can recall Professor Brajudulal Chattopadhyay's notion of settlement, then we must remember the fact that settlements are not only the places where human activity can be identified or where human only lived. Settlement can be differentiated into Khetra, that is agricultural land, that is Bastu, where human activity or human lived or human resided, either temporarily or permanently. There was pastur, there were aranya or forest. All these components are interrelated in a particular settlement. In reference to this notion of urban and rural, how would we address these different spatial components of an urban area? We call, for example, hinterland. Why do we call hinterland? Because we assume that urban center is the center and the hinterland is the periphery from where all the supports for the sustenance of urban centers are supplied. We can also think about just in reverse. If there was no, for example, these hinterland zone, we do not have any idea or any existence of this urban core. Secondly, I must mention to the debate between Professor Jean-François Salle and Professor Dilip Kumar Chakraborty regarding the establishment of the Mahasthan or Kundranagara. According to the excavation report, Professor Jean-François Salle and his colleagues have proposed that Mahasthan as a city was established in the Mauryan period. But according to Professor Dilip Kumar Chakraborty, he just disagreed with this proposition and suggested that it is not possible to develop an urban center without prior settlement. In this case, I would like to identify Professor Chakraborty's argument as the endorsement of the evolutionary framework, which is very dominant in Indian history and archaeology. That something rural or some non-urban settlement must be there, and that settlement or non-urban space has to be developed or evolved to be a city or a town. Secondly, in regard to Mahasthan, how do we identify what was the area of the urban? The fortified area? We are getting many archaeological material just close in the vicinity, adjacent to the moat of this fortified area. Whether it would be identified as urban or whether we will identify it as hinterland zone. Secondly, and what is the hinterland zone or neighborhood region of Mahasthan? Monica L. Smith, according to her work, suggested some chronological patterning of the hinterland zone. But according to our research, for example, in the northern part of the Mahasthan area, here in this area is part of Khetlal, and this is another very important site which is identified as another urban center in medieval period, Khoraghat, which is very close to just 18 kilometers north of Mahasthan. And it had developed settlements in early medieval period. We are getting several epigraphic material, copper plate inscription, also stone inscriptions from this area. And I think our friend Dr. Roisuku Furui is here, and he has just kindly helped me to identify some of our new inscriptional discovery with some primary reading. For example, the famous copper plate inscription of Beloa, the Chatsal inscription, the famous inscription of Viala inscription, the copper plate inscription of some other places were also identified or from this region. And you can see the density of settlement and size of settlements in this zone, very close to Mahasthan, is quite considerable. And if we go further south, here you will get Silimpur copper plate stone slab inscription. Here you will get Biala copper plate inscription. And all these copper plate inscriptions are found there along with their settlement, archaeological settlement context, which are very interestingly characterized by the association with old tanks and ponds. So, to the north of Mahasthan, we haven't surveyed the south or southwestern part, but northern part of Mahasthan, we are getting almost hundreds of settlements. And interestingly, size of those settlements are larger than Mahasthan or Mahasthan Gor, which is the world settlement. And if we consider Bangor is a very small settlement if we consider the world area as the urban center. And even if we consider the Karnashubarna, the area which is identified as the core is very small if we compare the area with the settlements in this region of Bangladesh. And I think if we just consult with the survey reports of Dr. Sheena Paja and several other of our friends in the northern part of West Bengal, then we will find the same situation. The size doesn't matter. So if there are very considerable and recognizable monumental buildings. Some of the settlements had recognizable fortification or walls. Some of the settlements are enclosed by moats. So what we will call these settlements? Rural settlements? If we consider the notion of urban in terms of Gordon Child, then we had no other way rather than to calling them urban settlements. But this is not the reality. They cannot be urban. They cannot be rural either, in a sense. In a sense, the term rural, the way it is contrasted with the urban, is not existence in the archaeological material of the study area we are talking about. In that sense, Khoraghat, a medieval town which has been mentioned in several medieval inscription and textual sources, covers a large area. And it covers an area which overlaps the region of covered by early medieval settlements also. So how do we identify these settlements? There is no fortification around the area of Ghoraghat. But there are at least 4 wall spaces or fortified spaces, some smaller and some moderate size, in the Ghoraghat and in the Pirganj area, just by the 2 sides of Karatwa river. So in this case, the definition of urban and rural becomes problematic on the ground of our archaeological findings. How do we identify the rural aspect? And even if we refer to the inscriptions, where some of the mentions have been given to donation of lands in a particular village or grama, or donation of land in a particular area which has name, it is very difficult to identify those place names with the reference to current place names. And even if we can identify those place names, it is very difficult or impossible to corroborate the epigraphical material with the archaeological material in terms of their settlement characteristics. So under these circumstances, the context of inscriptions are very important. So therefore, Mahasthan and this neighborhood region must be addressed with a different outlook. And if we talk about, for example, Khalifatabad or I will just skip slides. I have taken long time, so I will just go to some interesting. I will show work of an architect from Bangladesh. His name is Sajid bin Doza. He has done his PhD thesis from University of Évora, Portugal, on Mahasthan, and I will show some of his imaginative or conceptual reconstructions of the settlements or activity areas of Mahasthan, and then I will conclude my lecture. And this is from his PhD thesis, the way he has tried to understand the core area of the urban area of the Mahasthan, the wall of Mahasthan here with the Karatwa river, how he differentiates the different zone of Mahasthan, some conjectural and conceptual reconstruction of Mahasthan's settlements or building during 8th, 9th century and so on. This is very interesting from excavated remains. He has tried to assume how the ordinary people's houses were built, the dwelling unit. And this is a reconstruction of the right side, the gateway, beside the Karatwa river. And it has been mentioned that these are all assumption plates. And this is his assumption on the basis of some kind of analysis, spatial analysis of different kinds of streets within the fortified or walled area. This is Vasu Vihar and Vasu Vihar's reconstruction. And I must mention that from the recent excavations of Vasu Vihar by the Department of Archaeology, on the basis of that, Dr. Nahis Sultana has done her PhD from Department of Archaeology of Jahangirnagar University. And she has, with the help of Dr. Roystuku Furui, has deciphered one ceiling from Vasu Vihar, which can be dated to 6th, 7th century. She has also got one calibrated radiocarbon date. And it suggests that the present structure of Vasu Vihara are basically from 11th, 12th century. And there was another period of settlements, possibly another Vihara under this visible Vihara. And the name of the Vihara was, according to Dr. Nahis Sultana's PhD thesis, is Sivapura Mahavihara. And on the right side, there is another reconstruction of the housing unit by Sajid bin Doza. And we are talking about this Ghoraghat. And interestingly, I will show just one map, not these photos, of some of the settlements and archaeological features of Ghoraghat region. All these settlements are close to Mahasthan. Whether these settlements will be included in the hinterland zone or in the neighborhood region or not, because it is certain that during this period, from at least 6th, 7th century to 13th century, Mahasthan or the settlements of Mahasthan had close interaction with this region or with these settlements. And after 13th century, we have got evidence of an earthquake and partial destruction of Mahasthan, according to the reports published by the French archaeological team, according to the articles published by Professor Jean-François Salle. The earthquake had compelled some of the inhabitants to leave the city, but still the settlement continued after 13th century Mahasthan. But Ghoraghat as a town and as an administrative center and also as a military center developed during the 13th, 14th century and onward. Even during the Mughal period, we are getting reference to Ghoraghat as a major town and military center in textual sources like Visvaharati Guide. So there are interesting settlement pattern and spatial patterning of different kinds of settlement and different kinds of scale and size in this region. It is very difficult to identify them at R1, as well as in terms of Gordon Child's parameters. In terms of the parameters we usually follow according to the standards in the northern and western India, Ghoraghat cannot be identified as a city, and at the same time, all these settlements cannot be identified as city. This is a very interesting semicircular wall settlement, which is known as Nilamborer Gor, very close to Mahasthan Gor, and it is enclosed by concentric cycles of mud walls. And interestingly, this was related to, for example, these settlements of Ghoraghat. According to the textual and oral sources, these sites are also connected with the rulers of Kamrup region, that is Kamta, and that region presently which are situated in the Koch Bihar region. So it is very difficult to corroborate, even with the dating, that what kind of political administration was there in different periods of time, and whether, most importantly, whether they were part of a state which can be identified archaeologically as state. And interestingly, I must refer to some of the recent works by archaeologists where they have mentioned the problems of the theory of state according to the textual and epigraphic and other sources in the early period, on the basis of when they compare them to the archaeological material or archaeological sources, they have found difficulties to just corroborate the standards and parameters of state on the ground. That is the archaeology of state we are talking about. So in early medieval period, we know that scholars and historians have proposed different theories about the state formation, different theories about the urban decline and the formation of states. Brajudulal Chattopadhyaya sir has also proposed the inclusiveness or integration aspect of the early medieval polity. But on archaeological ground, it is very difficult or impossible to understand the state or its boundary or its functioning on the basis of settlements and the spatial distribution of archaeological material. This is the northern part, and we are not talking about that because we are out of space, out of time. This is the southern part, and I conclude my lecture with this. This is Khalifatabad, the medieval settlement, a medieval town. which was established according to the textual and oral sources by Khan Jahan Ali, Rahmatullahi Alaihu. And this is the map, and this was prepared by Ken Saifur Rahman, now regional director of Kumilla, Sylhet, and Chittagong region of Bangladesh. And this is part of the paper of Saifur Rahman and Afroza Khan Mita, which has been published in our edited volume. And here you can see the Bhairab River and changing course of Bhairab River in the southern part, the tidal zone of Bangladesh. And how can we identify these settlements where most of the remains are monuments, especially mosques, where only one or two mounds have been found, which can be identified as habitational mound, and where interesting excavations have been conducted by Department of Archaeology. This is the Mazar of Khan Jahan Ali. And according to the excavation, they have suggested a stratigraphy. And I will show some photographs of the excavation of this residential mound, the sections and periodization, some of the potteries, and this is the composite plan drawing, the horizontal understanding of the excavated space and different periods. These are some of the understanding. And in that sense, I must finish by referring to the very important work by the then Center for Studies in Archaeological Center for the Studies in Eastern Indian Archaeology, this Prashno Samikha volume on gold. There we can find some interesting application of archaeological methods to understand the urban center of gold. And interestingly, if we just look into that book and some of its chapters, we'll find that the conventional understanding of the urban center, even in the medieval period, which period is identified by scholars as a period where many urban centers developed in Bengal. Still, without Gaur and Pandua, we are not finding any visible or detectable archaeological material in some of the most famous cities or towns. For example, there are very little archaeology of urban center of Saptagram, the famous port, or in Sonargaon, another capital city of the Sultanate period. We are not getting that kind of archaeological material, but we are getting textual descriptions. So there are limits of archaeological work. Of course, there are limits of archaeological studies. We must do intensive full-scale, full coverage surveying and methodological excavation with the support of chronometric dating. That is these limitations from our side. On the other hand, we must rethink the notion and the parameters and standards of urbanism, an urban center, and we can think about some alternatives by taking into the heterogeneous aspects of urbanity. And at the same time, finally, I would like to conclude by saying that we must abandon this evolutionary framework that considers some development from rural to urban. There are many settlements that cannot be identified as urban in terms of the standards. There are many settlements which cannot be identified as rural according to the standards. So there are many in between or settlements the nature of which are in between. And we must find some terminology, some concepts, and develop our languages to elaborate upon, to describe and to interpret these complex situation of urbanity and urbanism in this part of Bengal and this part of Eastern India, where some of the standards or some of the taken for granted ideas and notions cannot be valid or cannot be justified on archaeological ground. So I would like to thank you all for your patience. I'm not sure because I'm sick how was my presentation, and thank you very much.
switch on the light.
Have I taken much time, Suchira?
No, it's absolutely okay, Swati. We have enjoyed the entire lecture very well. This is one of the very good presentation. You always give a very good presentation, Swati, so we don't have anything to say about it. We thank Professor Swadhin Singh formally on behalf of the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Visvaharati, for giving us a very illuminating presentation on these very important problems, especially dealing with urbanization, urbanity, spaces, urban-rural continuum or urban-rural contradictions. So obviously this is one of the very important work also, especially to those people who are working in areas which are on a very fluvially dynamic zone. So fluvial geoarchaeology, I mean, all of you have seen that how he has tried to show that how when we are trying to talk about urbanism does not mean that only you are looking into very high fortified sites or you're looking into only the spaces within the fortifications. There are also certain things which are outside that, and how we deal with it. Again, in early medieval or medieval period, we only not look into, or we should not look into what we call to be the, only the inscriptions. Of course, inscriptions are very, very important, but to correlate with archaeological record and how that can be important for us to understand the intervariability of this archaeological record, the different kind of sites that we are getting, the hierarchy, or whether what should be called as urban or what should be called as rural. So these kind of studies are very important methodological issues. It brings us some methodological issues to help us to understand how we should look into sites, archaeological sites, be it early historic, be it early medieval or medieval, doesn't matter. But the questions of urban and rural are not so simple as it was thought much before. So I once again thank Professor Swadhin Singh for clearing a lot of doubts. I'm sure the students had a lot of questions because they keep on asking questions on these, and they have kind of topics related to this. So that's a very important, I think that's a very important illuminating lecture for all of them. I also thank all the online participants, and especially we have very important illustrious guests with us today in online, Professor Claudine Bikron, Professor Furui, Professor Aloka Parashasen, and I'm sure there are many. I'm sorry if I have missed some of the other names also. We thank you very much for this active participation. I would like to also ask Swadhin for a formal permission for kind of uploading this particular lecture in our Visvaharati YouTube channel. Only if you permit, we will be just sending this recorded one to our Visvaharati YouTube channel. We kind of ask you for a formal permission. And one more thing that I would like to kind of announce here, on the 13th February, we are having Professor Osman Gopirachi as an offline lecture in Visvaharati. So we will be creating also an online link so that those who are not present, they can also join with us online. We are trying our best. And we'll be sharing the topic also, the title of the topic also very soon. And we hope to see you all in that particular lecture also, especially the online participants. And obviously our students will be there obviously. So Swadhin, again, thank you very much for this very important illuminating lecture, clearing all of our doubts and also helping our students so much with this very important lecture.
Colleen is also here. Suchira.
Yes.
Colleen is also here and she would like to add something in the chat.
Yes, fine. Yes, Professor. Yes, Professor Claudine. Please do.
Colleen. Dr. Colleen.
All right. Yes, Colleen. Hi. Please, you can add something to it. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Hello. Thank you very much, Shadeen, because it was very interesting, and we are all working on the same subject of urbanism, and Mahasthan, how to define the urban traits of Mahasthan and the link with the surroundings. So it's true that it's quite difficult, and I'm the representative of this Bangladesh French archaeological mission, because Nahid Sultana and Vincent Lefebvre were not able to be present. So it's I would like just to add for the students and the people in the audience that we are working also with the Department of Archaeology on the also on the internal urbanism. So you have discussed about space and scale, and indeed it's difficult to understand what are the urban traits features of Mahasthan for the so-called early historical period, but also its evolutions through times, because the urban traits might have changed also depending on the centuries. So it's just to tell to the people that were working on that problem, trying to identify the different spaces of occupation of Mahasthan, because as you mentioned, just a few parts of the site has been excavated. So basically, it's difficult even to locate the habitations in Mahasthan, the quarters where the artisans were. So we are working currently with the mission on that, and I think that we can work also in collaboration with your student, because we have also started to work on the environment of Mahasthan and all those satellite sites. So we have collected all the information that were existing. We have uploaded all those information in a GIS system, and we are working also with the geomorphologists, especially to work on those flat areas. So as you said, yes, it's true that we are always attracted by the mounds, by the elevated areas, but what do we have in the flat areas? And working with the Hugger and with geomorphologists, morphologists, that can help to also trying to figure out where you have occupation, settlements or sites, together with, of course, analysis of material culture, because if you have, for instance, very few, if you don't have a proper architecture for some sites, so you must use the archaeobotany or the archaeological material. So it was just to inform also the people that this collaborative mission is working on those problematics exactly right now, because it's true that it's huge. And yeah, and what is difficult also for Mahasthan and the satellite sites, it's actually to date all of that, because you have the problem of dating. It's really important, because it's true that until now, all those sites have been dated just based on some size of the bricks, some architectural features, sometimes based on the pottery. But as you mentioned, until recently, we didn't have a very good index of the pottery evolution. So it's true that without doing some test pit excavations and having C40 dates or other absolute dates, you have other methodologies, but it's always difficult also to assign and to know which satellite site has worked with the other one at which period actually, because you might have some concentration of satellite sites during a specific period, and then it has evolved later on, and then it's so all those questions, also the function of the satellite site, the dates, it's not easy actually to address, because you have many sites also. So if you have to excavate all of them, it's too much costly also. It's also a very important question in archaeology. It's this question extremely interesting, but it has a cost, and so as archaeologists we have to make some choices. So it's just to address to the students those issues, and to give some updates of what is going on. Thank you.
May I add something, Shukira?
Swatin, actually, this being a memorial lecture, we don't go for any kind of the correspondence. So if maybe you can personally speak to Colin on this particularly, is it okay with you? Will that be okay with you?
Sure, but yeah. I may just answer something.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Okay, just 2 or 3 points that the point which has been raised by Dr. Colin Nofra is quite valid. At the same time, we can also rethink our methodology of survey, because these days archaeological surveying is not considered as something which is just a supplement to archaeological excavation. So if we can conduct very intense and fine resolution survey around Mahasthan with a systematic method, we can hopefully find something interesting. At the same time, we can also find some kind of datable features. If we just follow the local people's land use pattern. For example, we always prefer to go for field in the March and April, because in this period people always dig the soil and cut the soil. So we get many peaks and sections. So interestingly, we do not need to cut or dig. So in that sense, our approach to archaeological survey can help us for understanding this complexity of Mahasthan. That is what I wanted to add. Suchira, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin, and thank you very much, Swatin, once more for giving this very important presentation. We thank you formally once more for being with us as a part of the memorial lecture that is conducted by Professor B.D.